Happy New Year too. Stephen Carroll is back with the business news. Happy New Year, Steve.
Happy New Year, Stuart.
Good to have you with us. Starting with the markets, they're slowly, very slowly actually, aren't they, getting back to business?
Yeah, it is the new year for the markets. Trading back open today across most of continental Europe, although London and Switzerland still closed in Europe today. Those markets starting the year in the red, down between around 0.2% and 0.5%. You can see Frankfurt's DAX there down by 0.5% at the open here in Europe. A quiet day too for trading in Asia. Hong Kong, Tokyo, Shanghai all closed for trading today. Just South Korea opened today. This was the opening ceremony for the Kospi for 2017. It finished the day flat though at 2,026 points.
Okay, positive start to 2017 for many markets. What about 2016 minute overall, if you look at the whole year? Was it a good year for shares?
Well, despite all the political upheaval that came from things like Brexit and Donald Trump's election in the United States, the main share markets saw pretty impressive gains over the year. Shares also boosted by continuing central bank stimulus in Europe and Asia, as well as the deal to cut oil supply from the OPEC group of oil-producing countries. In Europe, London's FTSE 100 saw the most significant gains, finishing the year up over 14%. Now, those companies are mostly exporters, so the fall in the value of sterling after Brexit really helped to make their goods more competitive. Gains too in Paris and Frankfurt, but Italy saw the FTSE MIB fall by 10%. That's its worst year in 5 years. Over on Wall Street, a good year for most of the markets there as well. The Dow Jones seeing the biggest percentage gain, up 13%, but the broader S&P 500 and the technology-heavy Nasdaq both seeing pretty hefty gains as well. Over in Asia, the picture a little bit different. Tokyo's Nikkei and the Hang Seng in Hong Kong just seeing more moderate gains. Shanghai Composite, though, down 12% for the year. That is, in fact, its worst year since 2011.
Let's turn next to Mexico. Now, there have been protests there over the rising cost of fuel.
The Mexican government allowed the price at the pump to rise by more than 20% on Sunday as it prepares to end fuel subsidies. It's part of a reform passed in 2014 to end a state monopoly in the sector. But the changes are difficult for consumers to swallow, as Anka Ula now reports.
The new year brought a breaking point for these Mexicans, who took to the streets across the country to decry their government. Their grievance? Fuel prices, set to skyrocket starting in January due to the finance ministry's move to end government fixed prices. Mexicans fear the price hikes are the first sign of broader financial troubles.
Food prices are going to go up. Everything is going to increase. In rural areas, people will starve to death. Transport's already expensive. So imagine how it's going to be after this gas hike. They don't care about us.
Gas prices will now fluctuate, a first for Mexico since 1992, when the government started fixing prices to control inflation. It is part of broader energy reforms passed 2 years ago under President Enrique Peña Nieto, which ended more than 7 decades of state monopoly over the energy sector and invited private investment. But in a country with shrinking oil reserves, where about half of its current gasoline consumption is already imported, some Mexicans say the government isn't investing enough at home.
Yes, the gasoline issue is a problem, but the problem isn't that the price is going up. The problem is that for more than 30 years, they haven't built refineries. They steal all the tax money, and this leads to us having to import gasoline.
On the 1st of January, gas prices went up by as much as 20% in some parts of the country, while diesel rose by 16.5%. It's the start of an uncertain year for Mexico, as the peso plummets to record lows and economists start to predict rising inflation.
And finally from Stephen, the new year has brought some new rights for French workers, and this is their right to actually disconnect from their jobs, isn't it?
This is one of these topics that gets an awful lot of attention. French people working less.
Yes.
But new rules have come into force. They're part of those controversial labour law changes that were passed last year. They're in force since the 1st of January. And the idea is to help workers reduce, I suppose, the time they spend checking their emails on smartphones outside of regular working hours. Now, the right to disconnect is now in law for the first time. It's a world first, in fact. A survey last year in France showing that almost 40% of people are checking emails from home while they're not at work. And the idea is to try and prevent those people from being permanently switched on when they're not actually in the office.
I didn't hear a word of what you said then. I was just checking my mail, Stephen. What does it actually mean, though, in practice?
Well, it doesn't mean that we can all stop checking our emails after 6 p.m. First of all, the rules only apply to companies that have more than 50 employees.
Right.
What the law does is obliges employers to develop with their employees a policy to deal with how that time that you spend outside of work while checking emails is accounted. It's just taken account of, really, by the employer. The suggestions made by the Labour Ministry are things like having email-free days or offering training to people on the dangers of how you can get burnt out if you spend too much time switched on to your job. But importantly, there are no fixed limits involved in the law, and there's no penalty for non-compliance. So there's no real concrete effect for a lot of those workers and employers, and we'll have to wait and see exactly how it is implemented.
Basically, Stephen is saying no change. Yeah, exactly. All right, thank you very much, Stephen. Stephen with Business on France 24. Alison